Thank you all for being here. I'm Mike Thompson from California, and I have the privilege and the honor of chairing the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force. And I'm here today with many of our colleagues who are on the task force, and we're here today to announce the filing of a discharge petition to force the Republican leadership to take some action to make our community safer. This discharge petition discharge petition on the floor today we're going to talk about is to bring the red flag bill that Congresswoman Lucy McBath has to a vote on the House floor. We know that red flag laws work. We know that they save lives. By using a red flag law, you're able to separate someone who is a danger to themselves or others from a firearm that they may have ownership of or possession of. As I said, I represent California, and California passed a red flag law in 2016, and they can document that that red flag law in California has stopped 58 mass shootings. We should be doing everything we can to make our communities safer, and that's what our task force has set out to do. We passed in the last Congress the Bipartisan Community Safety Act. That was the first major piece of gun violence prevention legislation signed into law in 30 years, and it has a red flag provision in that. Congresswoman McBath's bill will ensure that the work that we did in that legislation and the money that we were able to secure can be better spent across all 50 states and save lives. So thank you all for being here, and it's my pleasure to turn it over to a real stalwart and an icon in the gun violence prevention space, and that's Congresswoman Lucy McBath from Georgia.
Well, I want to thank Chairman Thompson for his tremendous leadership for the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force here on the Hill. He's been leading in this work long before I came to Congress, and I can't tell you how valuable you are in leading us and giving us the charge. And I want to thank all of my colleagues that stand with me here today. They're all champions in the front for gun safety and safer communities. I'm proud to be the lead sponsor of this legislation that is going to be discharged on the floor today, the Federal Extreme Risk Protection Order Act, with Congressman Carbajal, and the sponsor of the discharge petition that we have filed today that would bring the bill up for an immediate vote on the House floor. I have led this bill since 2019, and I have continued to hear stories from families everywhere I go and law enforcement all around the country about the lives that might have been saved if we had a red flag law in place. Stories like Mary Stiller Strobel, whose brother Ben was a combat veteran suffering from depression and PTSD. Ben had lost 30 pounds after his tour. Returning home, his father asked him about his weight loss. Ben replied that he couldn't eat, and he said that it was just so hard out there, Dad. It's just so hard, and everywhere I go, it smells like death. Ben was seeking treatment at a local VA hospital, but his family worried that in a moment of desperation, Ben might end his own life. Mary and her father drove to every gun store in their community. They showed these store photos of Ben, and they were pleading with them. If he shows up in the store, if he shows up to purchase a firearm, please do not sell this firearm to Ben. Ben Miller died by suicide. He used a gun that he bought at a local store. It's too often that the families and the loved ones who see the signs of crisis before anyone else are helpless to do anything about it. And red flag laws empower those families, along with law enforcement, to do something before it's too late. empower their voices, and allow a judge upholding due process under the law to determine if temporary limits should be placed to keep guns out of the hands of those who may be a danger to themselves or others. In the nutshell, this is what red flag laws do. Mary and her father weren't able to use that process because it was not instituted federally or within their state. They did not have a red flag law in place. This legislation would change that. Legislation, I remind you, that passed the House last Congress, the 117th Congress, with the support from Democrats and 5 Republicans. Legislation that was once held by Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal and Republican Lindsey Graham. Gun violence in this country is an epidemic. The Surgeon General just yesterday finally issued a report on the public health crisis that is gun violence in America and called for action. And so we once again are taking action. So I thank my colleagues that are here with me, my colleagues that are here in Congress, for taking action to join me to announce this new strategy to move this legislation along, common sense legislation that saves lives. I implore our colleagues in this House to sign the discharge petition and make these life-saving tools available not only state by state, but everywhere in this country, no matter their zip code or their political party. Because we, and I say that we are the Gun Sense Democratic Caucus, are working to protect the American people. Even if the current majority doesn't stand up with the safety of their own constituents and their own families, we will. And now it is my distinct pleasure to bring up to you an incredible leader in our caucus and partner in this fight for gun violence, Assistant Democratic Leader Joe Neguse.
Well, first and foremost, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force leaders, to Chairman Thompson for his principled leadership of the task force for so many years, to Representative McBeth, my sister in service, and served together on the Judiciary Committee, and she continues to inspire not just the members of our House Democratic Caucus, but really folks across the country in the way in which she's been able to convert personal anguish into action. And once again, doing so here with respect to her leadership on the red flag discharge petition. Of course, my good colleague and friend, Representative Robin Kelly from the great state of Illinois, no one has worked harder in trying to curb and prevent and stop gun trafficking in our communities than Representative Kelly, best evidenced by the provision that she was able to get signed into law by President Biden just a few short years ago within the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. There was a provision in that bill, of course, that Representative McBeth and Representative Carbajal worked vociferously on as well in relation to red flag laws. And we've heard a lot from some of our Republican colleagues about their purported support for these laws, which we know save lives. You heard from Chairman Thompson about the way in which these laws have saved lives in California. That's certainly true in my home state of Colorado that I'm privileged to represent here in the House. But in my view, talk is cheap. There's an opportunity for so-called moderate Republicans in the House Republican Conference to prove that they support these red flag laws. They can do so by simply walking onto the floor and signing the discharge petition that Representative McBeth and Chairman Thompson, Representative Kelly, and so many others are leading on. Simple way for them to show their constituents, the Congress, the country, that they in fact care about saving lives, because we know that red flag laws do in fact save lives. These laws have often been passed on a bipartisan basis in a variety of different states across the country, again, including Colorado. This should not and cannot be a partisan issue because fundamentally it is a public health issue, evidenced, of course, by the Surgeon General's announcement just yesterday regarding the epidemic and scourge of gun violence impacting communities from Atlanta to Chicago to California to Colorado. So inaction is not an option, which is why you see yet again House Democrats stepping up to the plate, making the case to our colleagues to join us in good faith to protect our communities, and we'll keep doing that each and every day.
At this time, if there are any questions, we're more than happy to entertain them. But we are seriously continuing to work as much as we can in a bipartisan manner to make sure that the extreme risk protection order is not just state by state. As Assistant Leader Neguse did say, we were able to pass that in the bipartisan Safer Communities law, but we want to save as many lives as we can. And it's important that every state, the citizens and community members of every state, law enforcement, have access to these life-saving tools. And so that is the reason why it's vitally important to make sure that this is a federal law, which is the most expansive way to keep our communities safe. Happy to say that the Office of Gun Violence Prevention has very much been accepting of this tool as a way to protect our communities. And this Democratic caucus is working in lockstep with the Office of Gun Violence Prevention to enhance the ability for states all across the nation to use these tools. And also in conjunction with the funding that has been appropriated for community violence intervention and the work that we've done, we hope to really save lives. Every community in this country deserves to be able to live without the unfettered access of guns by people who should not have them. And that is all that we intend to do. Each and every day that I do this work, I'm reminded each and every day of my own son, the loss of my son to unnecessary gun violence. And we know that these laws work. We know that in the states that have enacted these laws, that the so-called justifiable homicide rates fall. In fact, we have Senator Scott, who was the governor of Florida. After the Parkland tragedy, he himself signed into law in the state of Florida red flag laws. And so we know that they work, and we want to continue to encourage our Republican colleagues to do what is right. There are constituents that they have in their own communities that every single day are dying by suicide. There are constituents every single day that are dying by domestic abuse because of firearms. There are constituents every single day that they have that are dying unnecessary deaths due to unnecessary gun violence. Question?
This is the first discharge petition on this issue. Is there anything that you've learned from the previous discharge petitions as you talked to Republicans about signing on that you're applying to this particular petition on this red flag bill?
The question that we've heard before is that, the person that you're talking about taking the guns from does not have due process, and that's absolutely not the case. And we've been able to verify there is due process built into this legislation. The problem has been is that in the past, and we've tried to explain to them, is that when a family finds an individual or a loved one in crisis, someone who is exhibiting signs of being in crisis, and they have access to firearms, law enforcement oftentimes has had their hands tied. These families call law enforcement, please take the guns from my loved one. They're going to cause harm to themselves or to others, and law enforcement's hands have been tied. And so what we've tried to explain to our Republican colleagues is that what we are doing with this legislation is we are giving law enforcement the tools that they need to be able to go to court with the families before the judge with due process enhanced in this legislation in the court proceedings for that individual to ascertain whether or not they actually pose a risk to themselves or to others. And there are two different types of extreme risk protection orders. There's an ex parte, there's also an order. So, depending on what the judge deems necessary, the guns may be taken from an individual for a short period of time until it's ascertained whether or not they are at risk, or an order where those guns are taken from them for an extended period of time. But reassure, due process is implicit within this legislation, because once it is deemed that that individual is no longer a threat to themselves or others, they will have to pass a background check again, but they will have those firearms returned to them. This does support Second Amendment rights. There is due process within this legislation, because most certainly there are people in the country that are law-abiding gun owners, law-abiding gun enthusiasts, law-abiding hunters, and we're not infringing upon their rights. But we need to make sure that people who should not have access to guns or firearms when they are in crisis don't have access to them. Question?
You're up against a majority who've been very reluctant to cooperate on this issue. What about this do you think will be different, and why are you hopeful that this will go through?
Well, I am not under any illusion that they are going to cooperate, but we are appealing to the American people as well. We want the American public to know that despite our Republican colleagues' unwillingness to do what is right and to protect the safety of their communities, we're not going to stop. We're going to continue to build upon the work that we've done. There are advocates and gun safety organizations all around the country that stand with us, and we're doing tremendous work. When I came into gun safety advocacy 10 years ago, I can tell you the countless number of times I would go to testify in state legislatures, or to even come here and testify before the United States Senate. And there would be no one there with me. There would be no one to really help encourage me or encourage common sense gun safety legislation policy. But that's changed now. That has definitely changed now. There's not one mother, father, there's not one family in any community that I know of that is happy with the scourge of gun violence in our country. It is a public health crisis. It is an epidemic. And so we know and believe that we are doing the right thing. We are saving lives, and we'll continue to champion forward. But we will also continue to let the American public know that it is not us that holds up progress. And I'm hoping that our Republican colleagues will take heed to the voices of the people. Over 90% of the American public want common sense gun safety legislation. They believe there must be a balance of rights, gun rights, protecting Second Amendment gun rights, with a balance of common sense measures to keep people safe.
And let me just
Go
add,
ahead.
this is the process. We could avoid the discharge petition altogether if the Republican leadership would bring up before the body a vote on the bills that we on the task force and the American people know will make our communities safer and will save lives. But they've chosen not to. They've decided they're not going to bring any gun violence prevention legislation up. As a matter of fact, they've exacerbated things by removing the Veterans Administration from being able to ascertain information on veterans that are a danger to themselves or others. They've in legislation, in an amendment that they passed, they stopped that from being able to take place at a time when 20 veterans a day are taking their own lives. So this is what we have. This is the only tool that we have through the rules of the House and the legislative process to be able to free this measure up that we know saved lives for a vote from the House of Representatives to bring it into law.
If I could just say one thing, that's where all of you come in. You know how hard we're working. This is my, I think, third gun violence press conference this month. You see familiar people and sometimes more legislators, sometimes less, depending on committee. And that's how we need the media to come in to talk about what we're doing and talk about why we have not made more progress. Because as you've heard, what we're trying to do has saved lives, does save lives, and will save lives.
Absolutely, thank you. I'm wondering, are there any Republican colleagues of yours that have signaled to you that if this legislation was brought to the floor, they would be open to voting for it?
Some voted for it last.
Pardon?
Some voted.
Yeah, there were actually 5 Republicans that voted for it in the 117th Congress. I don't know what pressure has been placed on them, but I do know in private conversations, there are Republicans who said, yeah, I get it. You know, yeah, there are suicides in my own community. Yes, I understand what's happening, but I think they're just afraid to stand on the other side of their Republican colleagues. But I think deep down they know that they have constituents that are dying unnecessarily, as we all do in our constituencies.
The bump stock,
Yeah.
ruling from the court is a prime example of that. If you recall, when bump stocks became widely known of, and that was after the Las Vegas mass shooting, then there was action on the floor. There was a Republican bill to ban bump stocks, and they couldn't get it through their leadership. So the former president did it through administrative regulations, and the court just ruled that that was not constitutional. So we need to codify that regulation. We need to put it in law to prohibit these bump stocks, a device that's added on to a semi-automatic firearm to make it function just like a fully automatic firearm. And there are colleagues who were pushing for the bill, Republican colleagues who were pushing for that bill, but are reluctant to push now through the discharge petition process because they think it is going against their leadership. It is their leadership that's holding this up. And I don't know if that's because they're beholden to outside organizations, or they're beholden to the extreme right wing of their conference. Thank you.
Thank you.